Welcome to your daily devotional with me, PMV. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to take a step back and try to view a circumstance from God's perspective as best as He will allow us. Our perspectives are usually very limited and often incomplete, and we need God's vision, His perspective on the things of our life and how they fit into His larger redemptive plan. Today we're going to continue our series through Revelation, and we'll begin in Revelation chapter 15, and we'll begin to see how we fit into God's larger plan for His creation. All right, we're only going to cover verse 1 today, but there is an important concept that we must discuss. That's why we're only going to cover one verse. And the next time we're going to cover the most of the rest of chapter 15. We'll move pretty quickly next time. So Revelation 15 verse 1 reads, "Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete." As we've studied the book of Revelation, we've seen the judgments of God upon the earth in the form of the 7 seals followed by the 7 trumpets. Then we saw an interlude or a pause before the final judgments of God are to be poured out on the earth. Notice several things about Revelation 15 verse 1. First, it speaks of another sign. Well, what were the signs before this one? Well, most immediately, we saw the sign of the woman in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, and the sign of the dragon in Revelation chapter 12, verse 3. The woman represented Israel, and the dragon represented Satan. This third sign of Revelation 15:1 is a picture of the completeness of God's wrath. Look at what the end of verse 1 says, "For in them the wrath of God is complete." All right, so this is the concept I want to pause and address and speak further on today. It's the concept, the idea of the wrath of God. We need to make sure we understand this before we move on for the rest of chapter 15. I think the main reason I want to do this is because many people struggle with this concept of the wrath of God. Some people will say, "I don't believe in a God of wrath." But here's the problem. If you don't believe in a God of wrath, then you don't believe in the God of the Bible. You're actually believing in a God of your own making. The world is filled with people who have constructed their own gods. They take some religious concepts, maybe from Christianity, maybe from Judaism, some New Age or postmodern thinking, and they construct a God that they believe is good and fair, that it's acceptable to them and worthy of their worship. The problem is, a God of your own making is actually no God at all. It's a figment of your imagination. It's an idol. So why do we struggle with this concept of the wrath of God? Well, first, we think that God's wrath is like our wrath. What follows is that if God's wrath is like ours, then He would be cruel and unreasonable. But that's just not the case, because most often our wrath is based out of pride or ego or frustration for not getting our own way. Someone hurts us and we lash out. Our wrath is motivated often by sinful desires rather than an appropriate and godly response to what's going on around us. Our own hearts are the source of many of our problems. So does that mean we just overlook sin and unrighteousness around us? No. But it does mean that we need to at least acknowledge, understand that our own responses to the things going around us are often tainted by the sin in our own hearts. We are not good judges because we're not impartial. We want what's best for us, and most times we don't care about things that are outside of that immediate circle of ourselves and the people that affect us that we care about the most. So understanding our own tendencies to wrath, it makes sense that people would have a problem with a portrait of a wrathful God. But that is the problem itself. We can't take our wrath and translate it on to God. That's as if He deals as well. So why can't we do that? Well, because God is holy and righteous and just. He's sinless. He's different than us. God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't show partiality. He's not deceived. He, again, is perfect and righteous. He is a holy judge. He is, in fact, the only one who is qualified to judge the sin of the world. God will always get the punishment right. He knows when to show mercy and grace, and He knows when it is time for judgment. God never gets it wrong, and His wrath is always appropriate. And this is just one of the noteworthy differences between God and us, His children. He's always righteous in judgment, and we are not. So coming back to Revelation 15:1, it tells us there will be a day when God's wrath is complete. But what does that mean? Well, given the context of Revelation chapters 15 and 16, it refers to God's wrath that is being poured out on the unbelieving world before the return of Jesus. That is coming to a sense of completion. The tribulation specifically is wrapping up, and the wrath of God will soon be complete in that context. But why must God's wrath be complete? Well, why does it even need to happen at all? Again, because God is righteous and sin must be dealt with. At this point in the tribulation, God is dealing with the sin or the rebellion of the world in a very comprehensive manner. The great white throne judgment is still to come, but God is perfectly judging the sin of His creation that persist in their rebellion against Him. If a man severely hurt one of your family members and he was brought before a judge and into court, what would happen? Well, that person would be judged according to their works. But what if the judge said, I'm having a great day, everything's going fine. I don't want to spoil it by sending anyone to jail, so we're just going to consider this a mistrial and let you go home. Everybody, let's just forget about this and let's call it a day. Well, what would that be? That would be an injustice. We understand this principle, and so we need to understand to a much larger degree, God's righteousness demands that sin be judged. When we have a problem with the wrath of God, it's because we don't have a proper understanding of the righteousness of God. And we have a very elevated view of ourselves and what we think we are due. But also we must remember that this righteous God is also the one who stepped down from heaven to earth and died on a cross, taking our sins upon Himself, paying the penalty for our sins that we might be forgiven. We are guilty. We're condemned. He took our place. Jesus took the wrath we deserve, and God would be just in giving us. But God sent the Son to take our place. And Jesus' death was in our place for our sins. And because that is true, there are at least two things to follow, and then we'll close. First, forgiveness is available because the wrath of God has been satisfied in Jesus. But how do we forgive? How do we receive this forgiveness and escape the wrath? Well, it's through faith. As we believe in Jesus as the sacrifice for our sins, as our substitute, God takes the great sin that we owe Him, the wrath that is due us, and He writes in our account, so to say, paid in full. And because the righteousness of God is satisfied on the cross, forgiveness is available to all who believe in Jesus. But we must believe upon Him. It's not automatic. Second, we don't have to fear the wrath to come. God will not punish us a second time for the sins that Jesus already died for. The matter is settled. So through faith in Jesus, we pass from death to life. We have forgiveness. We are saved from the wrath to come. Does that mean that we're free to just live however we want to now? No, I think that's an actual misunderstanding of the cross and salvation at its core. We see this in movies, books, plays, and real life stories. People who have been to war would understand this. A soldier who dies for their fellow soldiers, and then someone survives that, they would understand this. If someone died for you, you're going to spend the rest of your life with that, realizing I need to live in a way that is worthy of their sacrifice. This principle is engraved in history, in literature, in our very being as humans. When someone does something extraordinary for us, it affects us, it changes us. Paul says it this way in Romans 12, 1 and 2, to bring this to a close. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So in light of God's mercy in Jesus Christ, it is our reasonable response to turn from sin and give ourselves wholly to Him. It is reasonable to be transformed by Him in light of the grace of God in Jesus Christ. It's reasonable for us to desire to be and to be changed, to be different. This is the reasonable response to the cross. Thank you for joining me today. For more information, go to pnvministries.org. And as always, I hope you have a great day.